100% of the land in China is state-owned, but the party controls the state. So there's no separation between the party and the state.
In this episode, I sit down with professor and political economist Chenggang Xu. He grew up amid the upheaval of China's Cultural Revolution and in the 1970s was beaten, imprisoned, and subjected to years of forced labor by the Chinese Communist Party.
When you are not challenging the Communist Party, then sure, you can say whatever you want to say.
The author of Institutional Genes, Professor Xu explains the origins of CCP totalitarianism, which he argues is unique and distinct from any other regime today.
Actually, the Cold War has not ended. So when people thought that was the end of history, that was a misunderstanding because the Chinese communists are still there. And now it's the continuation, just in a different format.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Professor Chenggang Xu, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
Something that is very, very difficult to understand, but I think of critical importance in the relationship of communist China and the free world is the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and how it's fundamentally different from what we think of as conventional institutions. I've struggled over decades trying to explain this to people, and you've actually come up with a way of doing it. So please explain to me what you've discovered here.
Right. So here, actually, if we want to explain that in a very simple way, then the simplest way of telling this story is that the Chinese Communist Party is actually a part of the Soviet Union Communist Party. So it's a historical fact that it was created by Soviet Union. And from the very beginning of establishing the Chinese Communist Party, it followed all the basic principles, basic rules of the Soviet Communist Party. So any other interpretations of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party is just wrong. And the wrong interpretations actually started fairly early, since the late 1930s, since the Second World War. So since that time, many American intellectuals were fooled by the Chinese communists. So since then, they regard the Chinese Communist Party as a something else, only with a name called the Communists. And that actually was a story told by Mao Zedong. So that was a story purposely portrayed a different picture of the Chinese Communist Party that not only fooled the Americans, more importantly, it fooled Chinese intellectuals.
So why don't we actually jump into this? You know, you highlight the difference, the crucial differences between totalitarian regimes and just simply authoritarian regimes. Can you explain to me the distinction here?
Right. So this is a very important question because a confusion between totalitarianism and authoritarianism has huge consequences. So first of all, let's look at the crucial differences between the two. In an authoritarian regime, usually you have multiple parties. Even in the case that there is only one party, and that party is not dominating in the way of a totalitarian regime. So Taiwan, before 1988, it was an authoritarian regime. There was only one party, which is Kuomintang. But Kuomintang was not as dominating as a communist in the sense that in Taiwan, they were independent churches. They were independent temples. They were local elections, and they were true private ownership. So all of this actually laid down the foundation for the later transformation from an authoritarian regime into democracy. So it's not because of the authoritarian leader all of a sudden want to change. Instead, it was a actually bottom-up process. And this bottom-up process depends on the true private ownership, depends on the existence of organizations. And before the transformation in Taiwan from authoritarian into democracy, there was already a quite famous theory called the modernization theory, and developed in the 1960s. According to that theory, an authoritarian regime could transform peacefully into democracy. And the reason is that in an authoritarian regime, once you have an economic development, and then you have a development of the middle class, and the middle class is going to have a demand for freedom, for democracy, and then this ever-growing middle class is going to push the whole society from transform an authoritarian regime into democracy. And indeed, Taiwan is an example, and South Korea is another example, and there are many examples like that. When we confuse between authoritarianism and totalitarianism, then we had an illusion. If we label China, the nature of the Chinese institution as an authoritarian institution, and then we equate today's China as Taiwan in 1980s. Then we had the illusion that once China developed, once China start to have a large middle class, and then the large middle class is going to transform China from an authoritarian regime into democracy. But now everyone found that this is an illusion. And so in particular, in the recent decade, so what the Chinese Communist Party has done shows to the world that it's impossible. The reason it's impossible is because the Chinese Communist Party controls everything, including these private firms. So how could they control private firms? So here, the way that the communist controls private firms is not by nationalization legally, but if we look at the reality, actually the Chinese Communist Party controls these firms not through the legal tools, instead controlling the entrepreneurs. So all the entrepreneurs, they have to submit. So they have to obey whatever the party requires them to do. And that is actually part of this agenda associated with this so-called anti-corruption campaign. So this anti-corruption campaign legitimizes whatever they are doing. So that's only one way of doing that. Another is that the Chinese Communist Party in the recent decade has made it clear that all the private firms, actually including foreign firms, all organizations, all the NGOs, including the foreign NGOs, as long as you are a large organization operating in China, on the Chinese soil, then you have to have a party cell. The party controls you through that channel. So they don't have to do the same thing like in the early 1950s to nationalize everything. So they just by controlling the heads. So actually in economics, there is an important understanding about property rights. So this important understanding of property rights is to look at the ultimate control rights. Instead of looking at the details, you just look at who controls the assets. So who controls the assets? Controlling the assets. Once you control the entrepreneurs, then you control the assets through controlling the heads. So that's the way to eliminate the true private ownership.
Chenggang, one quick sec. We're going to take a break. And folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with Professor Chenggang Xu, author of Institutional Genes. I really am enjoying this conversation because it's really reinforcing to me how central the supremacy of the party is to absolutely everything, right? And this is, it's actually very hard for us in living in a free society to kind of grasp how central, how it sort of insinuates into every aspect of society. Can you kind of build on that a little bit for me?
The way they maintain the supremacy is by controlling everything. So one of the concrete examples is military. They are the armed forces of the party. And then we have to talk about the courts. So all the courts, all the law enforcement agencies, they are the instruments of the party. The party completely controls the courts, completely controls the law enforcement. And then we have to talk about lawmaking. And again, the lawmaking is another tool of the Communist Party. So the lawmaking, so the party dictates what the law is going to be made and what the law is going to be interpreted. And another important aspect is property rights. So 100% of the land in China is state-owned, but the party controls the state. Read the Constitution, and in the Constitution, all the agricultural lands are owned by the collectives. So agricultural land is collectively owned. So the definition of ownership should be the ultimate control rights, not using rights. So when they talk about agricultural land, they are talking about using rights. So when the land is used in agriculture, is used for that purpose, particular purpose, then it's collectively owned. But once you try to convert a piece of agricultural land into something else, the law says that you have to convert that land, you have to nationalize the land first, and then you can control that, control the using right, which actually tells everyone in a very clear way that the ultimate control rights are in the hands of the party state. So that's land. And then the next is financial resources. So the number one issue is that in China, most of the finance is through banking, not through the financial market. And then if we look at the banking sector, then nearly all of the banks are state-owned. So you have just a very small number of non-state-owned banks, but these are collectively owned. These are ultimately are also controlled by the party state in the so-called commanding height sectors. By the way, the commanding height sector, this wording is by Lenin. So that's the Leninist word, and that is the explicit party policy since the starting of the economic reform. So the Chinese Communist Party made it clear that all the commanding height sectors must be state-owned, literally state-owned. Not only the state controls the entrepreneurs, but even talking about nominal ownership, these are literally state-owned. Commanding height sectors would include upstream, mining, and grid, communication, all of those most important things. So just by state ownership of the commanding height sectors, actually the state can already control the whole economy because all the private firms are operating in the downstreams. They relied on the upstream to provide the foundation. And that is the way that the state ownership can squeeze the private firms. So here we have the party state controls the armed forces, controls the lawmaking, controls the courts, and controls substantial part of the assets, all the land, almost all the banking, and controls the media, controls all organizations. So then here we can see that in practice, the supremacy of the Communist Party is very solid on the Chinese land. Hiding the true totalitarian nature it actually has been the key. So Mao Zedong portrayed the Chinese Communist Party as a Communist Party only in the name. We are qualitatively different from Soviet Communist Party. In 1946, Washington made a huge decision. The huge decision is that American government would no longer support Kuomintang anymore. So the neutrality of this American government was actually a consequence of being fooled by the Chinese communists. Only after the Korean War, during the Korean War, the American government realized that the Chinese communist was a true communist. But then, fairly soon, just a few decades later, they were fooled again. And then 1989, the massacres in Tiananmen Square actually didn't wake up Washington. So just the only change of the Washington strategy after 1989 was not to cooperate militarily anymore. But still, Washington had a hope that what happened in Taiwan could happen in China. Around 2002, the American government helped the Chinese to join WTO, and a huge amount of resources poured into China. And so then the Chinese, the booming of the Chinese economy really helped the Chinese communists.
Yeah, I mean, just a disastrous misunderstanding. And I mean, also, I think, aided by some very influential Americans who, I guess, really wanted to believe it was true, or were somehow, engaged financially. If our political leaders, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the U.S., wherever, they can understand the nature of the regime that they're dealing with, they would probably, make different decisions about how to interact, right? And I just, maybe as we finish up, if you could comment a little bit on that, because you're right, the United Front has been unbelievably effective in fooling all sorts of people, including even the Chinese people.
So when people thought that there was a final victory of the Cold War, or even said that was the end of history, that was a misunderstanding, because the Chinese communists are still there. And now is the continuation, just in a different format. So China now is a part of the global trading system. It's a global market, and China has controlled substantial parts of supply chains. This actually can be very, very dangerous when there are wars. So when we are talking about the wars, again, here comes to illusions democracies used to have about the nature of the Chinese communists. So there was a illusion saying that the Chinese don't have intention to expand their power, to have power projections outside of their territory. And so they have been expanding, they have been modernizing, and now you see they are more matured. So when they are matured, they are going to project powers worldwide. They are already doing so, and they are going to do a lot more when they are more matured, further matured. And when war breaks out, and when they at the same time also controls supply chains, so that is going to be devastating. So the impact is going to be a lot more serious than what the Soviet Union could do at that time. So here, understanding the nature of the regime and taking all necessary measures to eventually decoupling is necessary. So actually, this is a life and death trade-off. So this is not just about the profits. It's so much more than money making, so much more than profit. So many the businesses, even today in Germany in particular, many businessmen are still talking about investing in China, still have a huge amount of investment plans in China, but they didn't and they don't understand what are going to be the consequences. So China is a much larger threat than today's Russia. Russia is shrinking. The Chinese communist is expanding. So this is actually no comparison. And taking necessary measures is actually bottom line.
Chenggang, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you so much for having me to share my views with the audience.
Thank you all for joining Professor Chenggang Xu and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.